Hello, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Austin Arensberg, and I'm a senior director from Okta Ventures, leading the work for Okta, investing in startups supporting digital identity. And today I have the wonderful pleasure of moderating this discussion with Wayne Chang, who is the co-founder and CEO of Spruce Identity, which is actually an Okta Ventures portfolio company. I had the luxury of seeing Wayne in Seattle last week, and now I get to see him in the internet broadcasting out to Thailand. So this is like a great opportunity. And thank you so much, everyone who's tuning in, and we're going to have a really lively discussion. So thanks so much for joining us, Wayne.
Really grateful to be here. Thank you, Austin, and excited to get started.
Great. All right, let's do this. So first, I'd like to start with a little bit of introduction into Spruce Systems. Can you provide us with an overview of Spruce Systems and your mission and what the vision is in decentralized identity?
Yep. So the mission of Spruce is to let users control their data across the web. Instead of people signing into platforms and the platforms having control of everything, we imagine that the platforms can log into people's data vaults and you can control everything about your data vault, who has access or maybe who doesn't have access, how that access is granted and how it evolves over time. We think that should be in control of the user or someone they appoint to manage that, right? If they're not, super technical or don't know how to make all those things happen, they might assign someone. So we want this level of flexibility, and we think that a lot more innovation can be unlocked this way, a lot more digital freedom, a lot more ability to express yourself on the internet.
Fantastic. Why did you start Spruce Identity? What problems were you seeing that you wanted to address?
Why start Spruce Identity, right? Well, basically, I really care about making sure that when I have stuff online in digital form, it's treated with respect the same way that stuff is treated in the physical world today. And we have a lot of institutions and things enforcing that in the digital world, not so much. It's just kind of, historically it's been whoever can build out the most stuff and capture the most data, right? But I think that as people understand the increasing reliance on digital systems, we have an opportunity to revisit for people, for companies, for, beyond that, institutions. How do you govern things that are digital assets, whether they are financial in nature or just media or even content that you want to determine if you made that or a bot made that, right? These are all use cases where if you get a bit more control, helps a lot. Personally, my last company was in health tech, and it's really difficult to integrate with electronic health record systems in the United States. And this is a big problem. So just patients trying to get their data out of their electronic health record systems, the data that's rightfully theirs, so they can receive medical treatment. That was very frustrating to me to deal with those systems and watch so many people not be able to get the care they wanted because, someone had to get a password from somewhere or something like that. So moving to solving this at the protocol level so that things are respectful of this data vault model, that's really a lot of the ambition to make it easier for people to use their stuff online.
Awesome. So when I log into an online resource, I guess I suppose I look at my identity as username and password. That's sort of accessing or showcasing who I am. But how is that different than decentralized identity? What is decentralized identity?
Yep. So identity itself is hard to agree upon already, right? So we'll just kind of pick some working definitions that are hopefully generally agreeable for folks, right? So just starting with identity, typically we have two categories that we talk about. We talk about foundational identity. So a nation state or a country or a province might issue a general purpose identity that you can use, like a passport or a driver's license in some jurisdictions or others. And this can serve a bunch of purposes, whether you're trying to go to a bar and show that you're over a certain age so that you can drink, or if you're going to invest in stuff on the internet and they want to certify that you're not on any sanctions or things like that. This can be used in many different purposes. That's foundational identity. And then there's functional identity, stuff used for a specific purpose. So you can imagine if you're at a bar, you don't actually have to reveal where you live just to go in. They just care in the United States that you're over 21 or over 18 in other jurisdictions, right? So data related to who's trying to access something, whether that's on the internet or in person, right? So that's basically, the types of identity we talk about. And the working definition for identity, we'll get to decentralized identity in a bit, but for identity, It's really the way that we recognize, remember, and respond to people and things. All those facets that we use to, understand things. KYC stands for know your customer, right? And it has to do with identity. If you really think about it, it's getting to know who they are. Today, it kind of boils down to a set of pretty standard checks, but if you really boil it down to first principles, it's really about getting to know who you're doing business with, right? So basically, as we move to decentralized identity, we sort of expand the model where it's a very few set of people making statements about, this person can drive, or that person's a resident over here, or this person has a certain credit score, right? Very few very large institutions that are kind of slow, and rightfully so, because some of these things you need responsible friction to, if you're going to establish these important documents for people and things like that, right? So, but I imagine this moving towards a world in the digital, through digital enablement, where anyone can play the role of issuer statements, holding those statements, and being able to verify those statements and where they came from. Right. So this is what we mean by decentralized identity, what I go off of as a working definition, where you're able to issue a certificate to a video that you made saying that, hey, I made this and it's not a deep fake, right? Or being able to sign off on social media posts that you make and say, I made this content, it's mine, and I'm, leasing it to the social media platform to use, but I'm the real originator of it, right? So those are the use cases that we're really interested in, where people are issuers, or even attesting to a friend, like, hey, I think this person is loan worthy, right? And if you're loan worthy already, that might have some other use cases and implications too.
What is the mechanism by which decentralized identity will become adopted in the future? What does that look like mechanically for somebody 5-10 years out?
So the mechanism for there are mechanisms for adoption. How do we go from basically 0 to 1, where people are issuing decentralized identity friendly credentials and things of that nature, and then there are the technicals of how it's going to work. So the broad answer for the first category is it's going to be a combination of private sector and public sector. For the second answer, it's going to be it's really going to be based on cryptography, in my opinion. All the major digital identity systems that can hold water are built on cryptography, very much the same cryptography, maybe a different elliptic curve or two, as we have in the cryptocurrency and blockchain industry. So that's why naturally there's a fundamental level of compatibility. But in terms of adoption vectors, these are things that I think all facets of, I'm seeing across multiple industries, and also from a global governance perspective, we're seeing a lot of interest in adoption, namely, for example, there are many pilots for the mobile driver's license happening right now. So people in jurisdictions where your driver's license can also serve as identification, right? That's actually really significant, because it means that you have the first form of, government or state issued digital identity in your hands. And there's a lot of thinking about how do you present this over the internet? How do we make it not a phishing nightmare when people present that base identity, to websites or in person, right? There's a lot of thoughts going around that. The European Digital Wallet Initiative. I was basically building an identity wallet across 4 different consortiums. They're picking open standards and open source in such a way that you can have a lot of people implement this, and not just 1 or 2 platforms, basically implement for identities for everyone in Europe, right? So that's really the goals there. We're seeing similar movements in other places as well. But yeah, I'd say that the work is kind of happening independently in different areas, but are kind of coordinating towards 2 technical standards out there. I'd say that's the mobile driver's license from ISO. If you're very nerdy and technical, you'll know that as ISO 18013 Part 5, and that work is spawning a lot of different interesting work for mobile documents. And also W3C verifiable credentials, which are JSON based. So they're very familiar to developers already. It's more of an internet native format. These are the 2 bodies of technologies that are being incorporated into these frameworks that policymakers are considering adopting, right, as part of existing identity initiatives. And also, it's really basically the same cryptography we use in Ethereum or Solana, et cetera. We see, the digital signing element being huge, right? So we use elliptic curves in a lot of implementations for identity. When the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, for example, wants to sign off on the digital statement that, hey, you're qualified to drive. And they will make a digital signature, just like how we make digital signatures with Ethereum transactions when we're doing financial transactions on the blockchain, right? So we're interacting with smart contracts. So there's got to be this, I think, a deep foundational compatibility just based on things being built on digital signing. So that's what we're really excited about in the intersection.
That's great. So let me challenge you a little bit. You're talking about this future world where we can have digital identities mobily held on our mobile phone, or we have some ability to have more functionality than we have today. And yet, if I look back 5 years from now, I used to have a thick wallet with many different identity cards in it, right? And then, I have them now all on my iPhone. And in fact, actually, the iPhone's magnetic wallet, which I'll hold up here, right? It only holds 3 cards. So it's interesting. It's almost a physical manifestation of Apple pushing me towards reducing the number of cards that I carry in a wallet and putting, my health insurance and all those other elements of my identity into the phone. So the functionality has been great. I mean, I've seen a clear trend of ease of use over the past 5 years. How is decentralized identity going to be any better than what I'm already seeing happening today?
Yeah, so as we see the trends start moving in that direction, I would argue that it really depends on how you implement those identity systems. When you have these protocols, for example, the Apple Wallet will implement, or it does implement, the ISO standard that I just mentioned. It's possible to operate that in a decentralized manner, right? That part is more, I want to say, how you do the implementation than what exact protocols you use. It's possible that you, Austin, could sign off on a statement following that same specification that with whatever digital fact that you want. Doesn't have to be you, could be an employer or anyone else, right? We just care that the future of digital identity is open, and we have a lot of parties looking at how these data are created, and we're not creating these principal agent problems where you have one aggregated entity with a lot of power deciding things at scale for their own interests, even when it doesn't fully align with end users necessarily.
Yeah, and I think that's leads to sort of this bigger question here, which is, should users control their own identity, and what is the implication of that?
Yeah, and I think that there's a question closer to like a hook on, should users like pick their own cryptography, right? And I think most engineers would tell you absolutely not, because you have to be pretty qualified to be able to make good decisions with that, right? Or who's qualified to do key management of cryptographic private keys? That's another difficult question. And again, the answer is probably not many people who can be experts at that. So I think that there are ways to have abstractions that are aligned with incentives of the users. So instead of being able to, as a user, control every piece of data in my life, maybe I have the power to adopt a framework built by an entity who I align with, where values align, and we're good to go. We see similar use cases in the healthcare space already, where we have fiduciaries who make decisions on behalf of someone else who is less informed, but that someone else trusts the fiduciary. That's their job. Sometimes there are even legal requirements, right? So imagine having like an agent act on your behalf, like a lawyer, except over your data and everything. We want to see protocols that enable this model of interaction.
Yeah, I've heard of some use cases in decentralized identity where you could land on a website and choose which attributes you want to share with that website, right? So rather than them having all this information through cookies and other elements that they're using, you could actually empower that website to target you with particular types of ads or services. But in reality, I want all the benefits of them knowing a bit of who I am, so I can check out an e-commerce site, or I could do a one-click checkout process. And yet I don't know the costs that are associated with that. Can you touch a little bit about that and like how users can sort of overcome this gap in understanding between what their current conveniences are and how that would benefit in a decentralized world?
Yeah. I think that I think a lot of the challenge will be related to UX. A really good example of where we can use improvement right now is basically the cookies page that everyone sees and ignores and press like the X button or accept all or whatever the heck's going to get them to the content the fastest, right? And I'm guilty of that too. And I am in these working groups and a lot of these technical discussions about protocols that, rely on this stuff, right? So it's just not good UX for people, for a lot of people. Maybe some folks are just sitting there, reading the whole thing, clicking expand and understanding, but that's probably not the vast majority of people. Just like we said, most people aren't going to be privacy experts. So I think the ability to be able to, choose a sharing framework and just have a lot of that, that relationship defined up front, like, oh, this is a social media site that I don't really trust that much, but I think it's okay to just share my basic set of information, that's already public and it's, it's authentic content. So people know it's my real profile picture and it's my real account, but past that, I'm not going to share too much more. I think the ability
and a sharing framework for people, just to interject, if I may, is a little bit of that Google authorization, right? So you go to a website, sign in with Google, and then you'll see a few different options there. I want to share my contacts. I want to share my email headers, whatever. Is that a good example?
Yeah.
Would it just be more detailed in a future decentralized world?
It would be more detailed, and also it would be cross-domain. It would be across all your different assets, right, that you can hold in your data vault. And I think that's a great example because when you have a single sign-on provided by one provider, do you think that, one website that has its own photo sharing service, is that going to let you share from a different website that has its other competing photo sharing service, right? So there seems to be some conflicts of interest here that causes incentives to only allow easy sharing of the resources in that ecosystem, right? Whereas when our mission is to let users control their data across the web, then we think that it's only the user and the platform or service they're talking to that need to agree on the set of things that need to be shared. Why do we have an intermediary that doesn't necessarily, have the user's best interest in mind if they have an ecosystem to build? Maybe it's an option if the user wants to pick it, but we're just big fans of user optionality. And I think that's a big motivator for why we basically co-authored Sign In with Ethereum that lets you use your Ethereum address and account to log into a website directly instead of using Sign In with Google, Facebook, Apple, et cetera, as another alternative. And we have extension mechanisms that allow users to specify what resources they want to bring to their login experience. So that's really the vision for how we think identity should work. You're able to show up to a service and you're able to delegate certain permissions to access stuff in your data vault, and then you can revoke those permissions.
Okay, so I have MetaMask. I have these, standard tools that probably a lot of people that are in the audience do. I own some Ethereum. Walk me through a little bit about how I can learn about that and actually sign in with my Ethereum wallet. Or, yeah, I would love to learn more.
Yep. So we have a community site, login.xyz, and a bunch of supporters and adopters. I think there are over 1,000 known dApps that have incorporated sign in with Ethereum. It's an open standard released under Creative Commons. So Spruce doesn't have the IP or anything. We just want everyone to agree on one way to log in using Ethereum accounts. And we're working on a lot of privacy extensions and resource extensions so you can bring things to the equation, like verifiable credentials, for example. So you can sign in with Ethereum and then build up an identity exactly to where you need it and nothing more. And then you can continue on. We're also researching how this interacts with on-chain activity. Now, it's very I think it's better to err on the side of caution when it comes to on-chain identity. That is going to be a really contentious topic, I think, because there are privacy regulations. Once you put stuff on the blockchain, it's there, even if you encrypt it, right? So we have a lot of reservations and thought around stuff, identity data before it gets on the blockchain. What kind of abstractions and things before it can be used by a smart contract or something? Is that a good idea at all, right? So those are the discussions that are actively happening. Would love to talk to anyone who has ideas around this or use cases, because basically that's going to be a really important thing to, I think, unlock the next era of DeFi.
So just as a very practical example for folks in the audience, if they want to sign in with Ethereum somewhere, what would be an example that you could think of that's a fun use case?
Yeah, sure. So I think a really good example is just remembering preferences. So let's say, you log in, well, you're using a DEX, let's say, and you're trading, assets on the DEX. Maybe you sign in with Ethereum and you're able to retrieve your preferences. Not only do you like light mode or dark mode, but also if you're doing some trading or you're market making, what are your preferences for things you'll automatically trade at, right? How can that just be remembered automatically? What are the trusted token lists that you want to use? How can you show that they're legitimate and not a fisher? Well, someone could sign off on those lists as a digital statement, and you could load that into your context, right? And you can share your own list, create one of these and share with other people. It makes it a lot more engaging and portable. So I think
could it work could it essentially, if let's say English was not my first language and I was, speaking Thai or some other language, but I landed on a website that sort of automatically was in English. Is there some way that maybe, if it has a translation capability, it would know that I prefer to read the website in Thai? Is that an example of the types of functionality that would happen?
Exactly. And I think we could do even better than that, right? So the idea is that instead of just expressing your preference that you want to read this in Thai, you could even have your own dictionary that translates common things like login buttons, or even, uses a translation tool, right? It pings it to your API for the translation that you picked, that you prefer, and that's what you're bringing to the equation, and you throw in a chatbot or something if you want even more interpretation. Like, there's a lot more integration potential. It's not just limited by, what the sign-in service is going to let you check the boxes for. All that you need to agree with is the service on what you can bring.
That's cool. And one of the things that you mention a lot, so this is cheating because I talk to you a fair bit, but you talk a lot about your work with Spruce in standards organizations. And when I think of that, there's sort of two thoughts in my mind. One is like a mahogany lined room in Switzerland with a bunch of people smoking cigars and coming up with weird standards. Can you talk about what that community is and what role it plays? Identity standards. I don't even know, this like faceless group of folks. And what role do they play in decentralized identity? And importantly, what role do they play in the adoption of decentralized identity, both today and in the future?
That's a great question. And I think that it's less so mahogany tables and cigars. It's more like Walmart plastic tables and cigarettes between the packaged lunch. But I think that, and I'm not saying that they're all smokers, but it's anyway, what happens is that you can think, so these are technical standards we're talking about. When we talk about like global trade and other policy standards, right? I think that you get more mahogany, you get more, dressed up in pomp and circumstance. But in a lot of the great standards groups out there, you just get technologists who show up in like cargo shorts and flip flops, and they're like, let's talk about CBOR or JSON, right? And that's Spruce is kind of unique in that we're a part of, we contribute to many standards ecosystems, from W3C to ISO to ITF to the Decentralized Identity Foundation, which has some incubating standards there, et cetera. So each personality kind of differs, but basically if legislators make laws for people to follow, right? I would say that standards authors and contributors make rules for programmers to follow. Except like enforcement is a different story. There's like no state function to do that necessarily. Right. Some standards have that, but a lot of it is developers have to conform or not, and sometimes they don't. So this really affects adoption because it helps purchasers understand that it's been de-risked. We're not going to have the lock-in risk of having to stay with this one vendor forever. There are many other folks that can implement the standards, and I have optionality as a buyer.
And so someone who's in the audience today and they're interested in participating in these communities, you're saying that the standards organizations, there's rooms for people to volunteer and actually get involved and engaged?
Yeah, tons. I would say especially at ITF and W3C, there are a lot of involvement opportunities. ISO has a bit more of a complex membership process. You actually have to get selected or something by some groups, but it is possible if there's a will. I would say that bring your technical chops to the table, and I think it's really great to get involved. And if you're curious about how these protocols are getting established, for example, what the ISO standard for the mobile driver's license does is it describes how we send a signed data packet over Bluetooth. So how can you send that peer-to-peer offline, right? So that is really interesting work to learn about. And then it gets you thinking, well, can we send a signed transaction for Ethereum over Bluetooth, right?
Yeah.
And then it doesn't have to go through the internet, it could just be peer-to-peer offline. So I think the more observations you make, the more you're able to kind of connect the dots and have interesting ideas.
And that flips back to Spruce. I mean, what's your grand vision? What are the things you're most excited about? How can people get involved and engaged in the community that you have?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about making sure that the next generation of identity standards coming out that are going to get broadly adopted leave room for people to be their own issuers of statements that allow the innovation from the private sector to take root and really have private sector issuers and verifiers and wallets, right? And I think that we will see, if it's structured and developed correctly, explosion of use cases in terms of people having credentials, everything from patients being able to get their health records in their data vaults to students getting their various learnings from different institutions. Anyone who's studied across multiple countries will tell you how painful that is to have a transcript and move from one place to another. Job histories, things that you've done, all mix and matchable, hopefully, with identities issued by the state or your peers, right? So moving towards that is extremely exciting to me, and I think it opens up a huge number of markets. Specifically for Spruce, we work on open source software that enables this mode of interaction. So we have our project DidKit and SSX, which are open source projects that anyone can run and install and start issuing verifiable credentials, verifying them, et cetera. We right now work with developers on a lot of things, but over time, I think it's going to be towards end users.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very, very much. And everyone, what's the URL for Spruce Systems? How can they come check out?
Yep. You can just go to spruceid.com or follow us on Twitter at spruceid. And we have links to all our projects there. If you want to talk more about signing with Ethereum or how to bring resources as you log into things or credential formats, more than happy to. Just send a DM on Twitter. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate all the insights.
Thanks. And special thank you to the moderator who has been unmuting me after I unwittingly mute myself. That's been really, really great. I've done that like 10 times. So super appreciate it. I'm grateful to be here and talk to everyone. Just stay strong in this winter. And, I think that we'll see some really exciting use cases emerge.
Fantastic. Thank you.